So I was watching the CHGO podcast yesterday with Mark Carmen and Adam Hoge. And Adam Hoge talked about the project that he's working on as it relates to coming up with different traits that make up the best head coaches in the NFL. And on the show yesterday, he brought up 3 traits that he's noticed that are common among the best head coaches in the NFL. So I wanted to take some time to talk about those traits right now. Welcome back to Bears Yard. This your boy Vipe. And the first trait, he kind of combined 2 things into the first trait, but the first trait that Adam Hoge highlighted as being present in a good NFL head coach. Do you win and can you lead? Do you win? Whether you are a former player, a coordinator, or whatever you were doing, do you win? Let's take Mike Vrabel, for example. Mike Vrabel has multiple Super Bowl titles with the New England Patriots. Mike Vrabel, as a head coach, won with the Titans. He took the Titans to a playoff 3 times. Ben Johnson, who is the hot coordinator, has had a top 10 offense in the NFL for 3 years in a row, including the absolute best offense in the NFL this year. So clearly Ben Johnson can win. Clearly Mike Vrabel can win. If we talk about Sean McVay, he's won a Super Bowl. Clearly he knows how to win. Obviously, winning is the elixir that cures all. When you are looking at head coaches and you're grading them and how they're doing, can you win? So if you're going to become a head coach at the NFL level, a good question that teams need to be asking and doing their research on is, has the candidate won at the levels that they participated in, whether that be as a player or a coordinator? Can you lead? This one is self-explanatory, but I'll break it down anyway. When you walk into a room, especially a room of 53 alpha type individuals, are you able to command that room? We know that Mike Vrabel can. We know that Kyle Shanahan can. Andy Reid can. Bill Belichick can. It's something that the Bears have not had since the days of Lovie Smith, I would argue. No coach that we've hired, really, has come in here and been a leader of men. The closest may have been Matt Nagy, but even him, question mark. But the Bears are in sore need of a alpha type personality that can lead a room of 53 individuals on a football field, in a locker room, in the classroom, etc., etc. Which brings us to trait number 2 that Adam found common among the best NFL head coaches. Can you hire a quality coaching staff? And he broke this into 3 subtitles or 3 sub traits or whatever, right? Can you hire a quality coaching staff? Number 1, do you have a connection, or the people that you are considering hiring, do they have a connection with you as a head coach? So when Matt Eberflus became the head coach of the Chicago Bears back in 2022, he hired Luke Getsy as his offensive coordinator. Him and Luke Getsy have never worked together before. They did not have any prior connection. Luke Getsy came over from Green Bay. Matt Eberflus obviously was coming from the Indianapolis Colts. They had never worked together, and it was an absolute disaster. And then he went and hired Shane Waldron. And Shane Waldron, they did not have a prior connection. Shane Waldron was in Seattle. Again, Matt Eberflus was with the Colts and then the Bears. No prior connection. So if you are hiring a coaching staff as a head coach, are you hiring people that you have a previous connection to? And that's just because it's easier to work with these people if you work with them at a previous stop. When Dan Campbell became the coach of the Detroit Lions, he kept Ben Johnson on. Now, Ben Johnson was already there under the last head coach, Matt Patricia. But Dan Campbell kept Ben Johnson on because Dan Campbell had worked with Ben Johnson before on the Dolphins staff. So Dan Campbell was already familiar with Ben Johnson, and we see how that's going beautifully. Now, this is not a 100% surefire thing. None of this stuff is, but I felt like it was good enough to make this video because these are things that, you can immediately correlate to the successful head coaches in the NFL. So, number 2 on the subtopic that Adam Hoge brought up as it relates to hiring a quality coaching staff. Has the person you're hiring been a coordinator in the NFL? Again, Matt Eberflus got hired, brought in Luke Getsy to be his offensive coordinator. Luke Getsy had never been a coordinator in the NFL, and it bombed. Now, again, this is not 100 foolproof because then the next time he brought in Shane Waldron, who had been a coordinator previously, and it just absolutely bombed. But I would argue that you would have much better chances as a head coach if you're hiring a staff that has been a coordinator before in the NFL. Not at the college level, but at the NFL level. Number 3, Adam Hoge kind of identified that when you come in as a head coach of a new team and you retain at least somebody from the previous coaching staff, you are more likely to have success with that person. I just brought up Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson. Dan Campbell retained Ben Johnson from the previous staff because, again, Ben Johnson was already in Detroit before Dan Campbell became the head coach. But Dan Campbell retained Ben Johnson because he already had worked with him before in Miami, and he knew that Ben Johnson was a bright individual, so he retained him. They already had that working relationship, and it has absolutely blossomed for them in Detroit. I think, if somebody comes in here to be a head coach, especially if we get a defensive minded head coach that comes in here, one would have to ask, would they consider retaining Thomas Brown, who is the current head coach and prior offensive coordinator of the team, because he already has a relationship with those players, even though I know some of us are down on Thomas Brown, myself included, but I'm not going to put all of the blame on Thomas Brown because, again, the team was already checked out before he became the interim head coach, but nothing has changed since he became the head coach. But you have to consider at the very minimum retaining Thomas Brown if you are a defensive coordinator. Even if you're Ben Johnson and you take the Bears job, maybe consider retaining Thomas Brown because, again, he's already here. He's shown that he has some offensive coordinator chops, and you're more likely to have to stick with somebody that's already been here, that the players are familiar with, and different things like that. So, will you retain a coach that was already on the previous staff? Now, usually when a new coach comes in there, they want all their own people, but again, it doesn't hurt if somebody that was on the previous staff was very good at their job. It doesn't hurt that you retain them. Now, what we better not do is retain anybody from the previous staff that has anything to do with the Chicago Bears offensive line. Not allowed. Kick them all out. Fire them on Monday. They should all be fired. Chris Morgan, retaining him was an absolute mistake because I think he was on Matt Nagy's staff, and then they made Matt Eberflus keep him. And actually, no, it wasn't a complete mistake until Shane Waldron came in because Chris Morgan, the Bears had like some of the best rushing attacks and things like that under him. And the line they weren't the best, but they were serviceable for Justin Fields. But then Shane Waldron came in here as offensive coordinator and completely scrapped what Chris Morgan was doing with their blocking scheme and things. And the line has been atrocious this year because I think more of changes that Shane Waldron made. But I would still argue that you really can't retain Chris Morgan. You got to get him out of here. The offensive line needs a complete, fresh, clean start. So any head coach that comes in here, you got to clean out the entire offensive line staff. They got to go. Sorry. Number 3, the third trait that Adam Hoge alluded to as common in successful NFL head coaches. Are you an offensive head coach, or what is your offensive pedigree? We talk a lot about the McVay tree and the Shanahan tree and different things like that. The Andy Reid tree. I mean, say what you want about Matt Nagy. He took the Bears to the playoffs, I think, 2 times as head coach here. He was coach of the year in 2018. So the NFL today is an offensive-driven league. Not saying that defense is not important, but the coaches that are in the playoffs and winning Super Bowls of recent memory, they're more often than not offensive coaches. Kyle Shanahan has been to 3 Super Bowls. Hasn't won one, but he's been to 3 Super Bowls. Andy Reid has won multiple Super Bowls recently with Patrick Mahomes and whatnot. Sean McVay won a Super Bowl a few years ago. So it seems like offensive-minded head coaches are the wave that the NFL is going right now, and they are the ones that are having the majority of the success and are winning where it matters most in this league. The Chicago Bears, for far too long, have been stuck in the allure of 1985. It is time to grow up. It is time to graduate into the modern NFL of 2025 and beyond. McCaskies, I don't know what y'all doing over there, but as much flack as people give the McCaskies, I feel like they have slowly kind of transitioned into a more modern run ship with the hiring of Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren. And I know Kevin Warren has been around long enough to know what needs to be done as far as running a successful program in the NFL. He was with the Rams and the Vikings back in the day, so he understands. But this is an offensive-driven league, and we definitely, as I've mentioned in previous videos, we need to target an offensive-minded head coach, whether that be Ben Johnson or Joe Brady or Liam Cohen or Todd Monken from the Ravens, or somebody that is offensive-minded. That needs to be the focus, especially when you consider we have a young quarterback in Caleb Williams who is ascending and who needs to be developed better so he can reach his maximum potential. We need to target the offensive side of the ball. Not saying that we should not interview defensive minds. I mean, we should definitely interview Mike Vrabel. We should definitely interview Brian Flores and other defensive-minded head coaches. But I would lean towards a more offensive-minded head coach because that's where the league is going, and that is where the success is being had. And, it's funny because I say this about YouTube, right? When I'm trying to come up with a thumbnail idea, I look at what the top Bears channels in the niche are doing as far as thumbnails, and that's how I take inspiration from my thumbnails. Well, it's the same with trying to find a head coach in the NFL. What are the best teams? How do those coaches look? What are those coaches doing? What is Andy Reid doing? What is Sean McVay doing? What is Kyle Shanahan doing? What is Kevin O'Connell doing? What is Dan Campbell doing? All of those are offensive minded head coaches. Yes, Dan Campbell is an offensive minded head coach. I mean, I know some of y'all might not be aware, but Dan Campbell, he was a tight end coach before he became head coach. He's offensive minded. But the league is an offensive league, and it's time for the Bears to join the offensive revolution. And that is why we need to target our offensive minded head coach. But Bear fans, let me know, are you on board with these traits that Adam Hoge has highlighted as it relates to getting the best head coaching candidate possible? Drop a comment and make sure you subscribe to the Yard for more opinionated Chicago Bears talk.